Welcome to the feedback session for week 6 of this course, which is transitioning to water-sensitive cities. How do you put in place institutional, governance, regulatory arrangements to ensure that water-sensitive planning becomes business as usual? So Chris, welcome back. Chris Chesterfield. We've seen Chris as a lead educator in week 4, which is on resilience to flooding, and of course a substantial contribution this week talking about the water-sensitive story, the stormwater story for Melbourne. One of the points you make, Chris, is that developing good policy and strategy requires paying attention to both top-down policy development, government leadership, as well as bottom-up community involvement and citizen engagement. And these are two issues that our learners have been asking a number of questions about. And one question I'll read out goes directly to the issue of bottom-up involvement. And the question is, what is still missing for me is how to embed water sensitivity in a community to be long-lasting. That is, it's easy to involve the community in such things in a short burst, but much more difficult to instill water sensitivity over a longer period of time. So Chris, you've been involved in this these policies and program developments. What's your perspective on that question?
Well, it is, I think, a great challenge to embed water sensitivity in community, and of course the transition along that city-state continuum is, I think, one of the characteristics of that transition, if you like, along that city-state continuum to the water-sensitive city is the increasing engagement and participation of community and citizens in the provision of water system services, if I can call it that. And so achieving that requires, I think, a significant change in the culture and capabilities of organisations like water utilities as they move from essentially a model of service provision, which is about centralised assets, having strong technical expert capabilities, and pretty much keeping community and citizens at arm's length, and communities
which is safe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great service. It's been very beneficial, but the community's sort of grown used to being at arm's length and not really being engaged. But I guess as you move into that phase of waterways city, water cycle city to water sensitive city, I think that is characterised by increasing levels of community engagement and participation. And the question is, well, how do you build that? And I think one way of doing that is to connect the behaviours and opportunities for citizen engagement with the things that citizens or community really care about. And of course, waterways is one of those things. So communities definitely care about waterways. They're interested, I guess, in behaviours which will help protect their waterways, and they're interested in participating through things like being involved in friends groups and doing plantings, through citizen science, monitoring waterways, reporting on waterways, getting to understand waterways. School groups can get involved in those sorts of things.
So there's a sense of ownership.
So there's that sense of ownership. And then I think you can build on the crises like we had in Melbourne with the Millennium drought. Water security becomes an issue. People were interested in participating by getting rainwater tanks, and so we saw in Melbourne 6% of households, I think, at the start of that Millennium drought, moving to, I think, somewhere around about 30% of households having rainwater tanks. So that's another example of that sort of engagement and participation, demand management programs, and so on. So I guess it's a bit of both organisations shifting their focus to wanting to engage citizens and building that capability to do that, but also taking advantage of the things that the community is interested in, such as waterways, reducing water consumption to deal with water scarcity and so on.
Well, that's one side of the coin. Chris, the other side of the coin is getting long-term committed leadership from government and water authorities and management authorities and local government, and that top-down challenge has been raised by a number of learners. One learner, I think, says what a lot of people think. With regular democratic elections occurring every 3 or 4 years, it's very difficult for political decision makers to think beyond their term, far less 10, 20 or more years into the future. A lot of people say that, and I think it is a challenge. But in Melbourne, we have had a steady development of policy and program with a commitment, bipartisan commitment from government. What do you think ensured that or brought that around?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting. So the Victorian Stormwater Action Program, if you like, which was an initiative of an incoming government, which had funding support and so on, actually ran out of that support after the first term of that government, and the attention shifted from the environment and impact of stormwater pollution on waterways and bays to water security and thinking about stormwater as an alternative resource. And while that sort of threatened the momentum for a while, it in the end it sort of created further dimensions and began to help connect the stormwater issue to a sort of a broader narrative about the city. And I think that's really the secret to that top-down support, is
to capture their bigger vision.
Yeah, I think so. So to have that vision, build that narrative, connect things like stormwater into that narrative. And for Melbourne, that's really, there's this strong commitment to livability and being able to build stormwater in things like stormwater into the narrative, or just water services generally into that narrative around livability. I think is the thing that builds that political support, ongoing political support. Yeah.
And finally, you make the point in both week 4 and this week about the role of champions. People who are in the middle of all of that, whether they be at a very senior level or middle or operative level, or members of the community, champions who see this vision and stick with it. Now, you've been a champion in Melbourne of stormwater management and water-sensitive urban design. I might ask you, what have been the forces, if you like, the motivation for you to stay with it over the last 20 years?
I could say lots of good fun and working with good people, but I think that's
part of it.
That is part of it. Yeah. That steady momentum, I guess, of improvement and getting outcomes. And I guess in my own case, I perhaps began as a bit of an outsider champion.
Sorry, outsider in what sense?
Well,
this was 20 years ago.
Yes, so 20 years ago, being a bit of an outsider,
not a senior
champion,
not a senior bureaucrat,
not a senior bureaucrat,
policy person,
but having an opportunity to work within the industry and challenge existing practices and ways of thinking. Gradually, I guess the value of those new approaches was appreciated, and I guess I became a little bit more demanding about being given the opportunity to influence, and through taking on more senior roles, and particularly in an organisation like Melbourne Water, which is very influential. So moving from the sort of outsider champion to more of an insider champion, and having that ability to really start to embed those new ways of thinking and those new practices through the authority, I guess, and of those sorts of organisations. And I think the big reward that has kept people like me involved as well is that in order for champions to be successful, you have to build cross-sector and cross-discipline networks, and to be, I guess, part of that network is in itself very satisfying, and for that, I guess, for that network collectively to be championing these changes and being able to influence things individually and collectively It's quite an amazing thing to see how change can occur through that. If you like, that sort of networked leadership of champions. Yeah,
it's almost magical, isn't it?
It is almost magical. Yeah. So stick at it, champions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the discussion today and your contribution to the course. It's been much appreciated. Our learners have been telling us that. And next week is the last week, week 7, where we discuss the basically how to influence decision makers to make decisions that will lead to water-sensitive planning and design being business as usual. How to embed that. So that's all the range of things, including economic development and political decision-making influence, is being discussed next week. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.